Hello viewers, thanks for tuning in. This is going to be a commentated run of a plus 20 Court of Stars. It's currently week 3 of Dragonflight 10.0.2. I'm playing Disc Priest. This week's affixes are Sanguine and Volcanic Fortified. I'll do a quick overview of my gear and talents before I get into the footage of the run. So I'm set up mostly for haste and verse, my primary two stats right now. I've got a decent balance of crit and mastery as well, just because you're kind of taking eye level over secondary stats at this point. Running a DPS trinket, the Rage Feather from Nokud, does a lot of my damage overall. Does not contribute to atonement healing, but it is a lot of passive damage, and I don't really feel the need to run a second healing trinket. My crafted items are Elemental Lariat, and the Battle Res Bracers, and the Alchemist Stone right now. The talent build I'm using is this. I have kind of moved points around a lot this expansion, trying to figure out what works best. A lot of people do like Shadow Covenant. Currently, I don't think it's worth the mana for the small throughput increase you get from pressing it. 10.0.5, I see that changing in Shadow Covenant, and the whole Shadow Disc playstyle becoming a lot more prevalent. But this has been good so far. Decent balance of safety gaming and damage. I've also tried the Aegis of Wrath build, where you kind of ditch all of these talents over here for Aegis of Wrath, and I don't think its actual atonement throughput is high enough, but I know I've seen people run it at high keys and do well, so you can, shooter's preference with this one. Now I think I'm going to move into the footage of the run, and I'll see you in a bit. Alright, so here we are in the Court of Stars. I think this is one of the easier dungeons this season. Their boss design is definitely a little antiquated as far as the newer bosses. Kind of just spamming AoE damage at all times. Some of them can get a little dicey, but Disc does quite well in this dungeon, I think, in terms of the bosses and the way the damage profiles are. It's usually kind of rot damage, or the 4 seconds of burst healing on the last boss is pretty easy to handle, I think, as long as everyone is playing well. Routing in here can be a little tough if your group or your tank isn't aware of the patrols and what mobs are where. You generally only really want to pull what you want to pull in here, which I guess is the same for any dungeon, but things can go pretty poorly if you pull extra mobs in court. So here I start off with a barrier on myself and the Warlock, because that Saber Leap is very dangerous on a high fortified key. Puts a strong dot and hits for about half our health through barrier. And then you see I move forward of the lock there after we both get cleaved in barrier because we were too close together. But I move forward of him. Generally, I think it baits on the furthest target, and I know Warlock can tank that hit a lot better than I can as a Disc Priest. Warlock's pretty tanky. So we finished up this first pull here. Pretty uneventful. A little damage goes out. We move down to the dock pull. Here I'm messing with my plater because I accidentally messed up my nameplate anchor. This dock pull is pretty easy. None of these mobs really do anything to anyone but the tank. The only important kick here is the Arcanist. So with 2 melee, it just is auto-kicked. We burn down the sentry because we don't want it to run upstairs and summon more enemies. And then it's pretty much just sit here and AoE the guards and the energies down while, I keep the tank alive. I am spreading dots pretty poorly here. I think I should have Purge the Wicked on everything here at this point. I'm just kind of focused on my Prot Paladin here. He got a little low. Yeah, right there. I think he took a frontal. So definitely need to work on my dot uptime. See, I don't really get Purge the Wicked on everything until the very end of the pull here. So we kite this out. Just keep trying to keep everything out of Sanguine as best as possible so they don't all heal up. A lot of these mobs will just stand there and cast Quelling Strike or Charge Blast and sit in the Sanguine. We get a little bit of healing off of that one. Probably at this point I should also be running over and hitting that pillar to the left to disable it, which I now do. Probably could have done that earlier, because no one was really in danger. We move into the next pack here. Same deal, burn the sentry so it doesn't run away. And then we focus damage on the construct and just cleave everything off of that. One thing I'm noticing already is that my Divine Star usage is pretty poor. I just kind of keep it off cooldown most of the time, which is pretty bad. So definitely need to work on that. Our Demon Hunter dies to what looks like a worm explosion. You know, that'll happen. Sometimes it's hard to see stuff in this dungeon because you're looking down and the trees are all in your face. There's a lot of frontals. Pretty uneventful pull. Trying to keep my Warlock alive through his Burning Rush, which he insists on keeping on for the entire dungeon, so I'll be keeping Atonement on him. That's simply a perk of playing with Jetlock, is that you pad your overall healing by healing off Burning Rush. Finish the pull-out. Mind Soothe helps here to avoid pulling that pack inside. A lot of people will run too close and pull that guard. I generally will throw a Mind Soothe on him as we run by, and that helps to avoid him pulling into extra sabers, which is a pretty tough pack on Fort. And these sabers, I'm very wary of the cats, because as a priest, you are often the furthest target away and often the target of said leap, and it'll hit you pretty hard. I generally try to have barrier up for any pack that we're pulling sabers, or I'll pre-rapture. It's a lot of smaller pulls this dungeon. You can't really big pull with the constructs because they require so many kicks. I guess you don't really have to kick suppress because it can be dispelled, but it still is an interruption to your DPS. But Charging Station, if there's any mobs around the construct, has to be kicked every time, or you're fighting the pack again, because everything will heal to full. I definitely need to work on my Twilight Equilibrium cycling, where you have to cast a Shadow Spell and then Holy Spell and then Shadow Spell and Holy Spell to maintain that 15% buff. That's something that I'm not used to playing around. I'm fairly new to Disc, at least modern Disc. The last time I really played Discipline was in BFA. So, 4 years ago now? And I don't remember ever playing around that talent, so my muscle memory is not quite built for playing around TE yet. You can clear a lot of this as a Disc Priest when you go and you're doing these pillars. Mind Soothe and Fade is pretty much stealth. You have to be basically walking through a mob's hitbox to aggro it if you're Mind Soothe and Faded. So we disable all 3 beacons, which I think is worth it. Some people like to keep one alive to have you have the shorter RPE at the end, but I think failing the minigame is easier. So there's no reason to fight an ad in this fight if you don't have to. Gerdo is a pretty easy fight for Disc. If you take Improved Mass Dispel, you can mass every single Arcane lockdown before it even deals damage, so literally the only person that takes damage on this fight is the tank, and you just crank damage the whole fight. We lost, I think, a Power Infusion the Demon Hunter here, because of Locke's cooldowns aren't up. And it's, pretty much tank and spank. You dodge the laser, you dodge the frontal, there's no ads because you disable all 3 beacons. This fight really only gets spicy on weird affix sets. Like Storming might be one that, people start to take some damage on, or Quaking, if you're not paying attention, you get Holy Locked right before an Arcane lockdown. That could be pretty nasty. so Gerdo dies. We have an alchemist in the group, so he drinks the poison and dies at 25%, which it's pretty uncommon to not have an alchemist at this point. Everyone is running it for the extra file duration. This pull I don't love. We generally pull that guard and the worms down the stairs there with the boss, but we were concerned about Sanguine dropping under the boss and healing him. Usually we'll just do this construct alone and drag him up the stairs to the next pull. But you know, fairly standard early Court Stars pull. Melee, die to exploding worms once again. I think the Demon Hunter probably should have ran back here instead of waiting for the res, but I think once we had the guard down to about half health, I just told him to wait. Honestly, we probably could have burned a B-res on him for efficiency. There's not a whole lot that kills you in this dungeon. There you see me use a Potion of Gusts, which I'm a huge fan of. They're the green pots on the right side of my screen there, bound to Control V. They use your combat pot cooldown, which kind of sucks, but they're pretty cheap, and they just kind of yeet you forward and give you a little bit of slow fall, which as a priest can be pretty valuable, unless you're playing Goblin. You know, if you're not like me and you don't care about aesthetics, you play Goblin Priest and you just have 1 minute cooldown Rocket Jump, which, you know, blasts you forward on pretty short cooldown. But Potion of Gusts can be pretty nice. These packs are a little spicy. If you waste stuns, because that's the only thing you can stop the Inquisitor's Eye Storm with is stuns. If you full DR him on stuns, Eye Storm can be pretty tough. I think this one we actually have fully DR'd him, and it starts to hit pretty hard. Like you see it ticking for half the group's health. You really want to interrupt that. Imp packs can be pretty spicy as well. You basically need AoE stops and AoE burst damage on these packs. If you don't have both of those, both or either of those things, someone's probably going to die to imps. They have to be AoE stopped and basically crushed instantly. Because once the Drifting Embers start channeling, or someone just gets RNG'd and has all of those firebolts cast on them, there's really no amount of healing that can save that pull. It comes down to burst damage and AoE stops. I think I could be a little more liberal with my cooldown usage. Like, I probably should have hit Barrier or Rapture prior to pulling those imps. So here we've got a decent amount of damage. You see, before I even make it to the pack, they're at half health. I think our Warlock had a lot of imps saved up from the last pack and just had a big implosion at the start. Yeah, you can see he's at 200, almost 200k DPS at the start there. This is pretty standard court routing for us. We just make our way forward and then to wherever the first Enforcer is. We definitely could have pulled the Enforcer with this pack. I think we could have just pulled that one that's you see in front of me there with the pink nameplate. But we're playing a little conservatively. I think this is all of our first times 20 this season. You can see me start the healer bonus free mini boss, whatever. Learning all the buffs in court and what they do is pretty important if you're going to be doing this dungeon. I'm not going to go over them all, but the healer one is always that Wounded Nightborn civilian, and you click on him and it will auto summon one of the 3 mini bosses that you have to fight without you having to fight the Enforcer. This first mini boss is pretty easy. She spams an AoE, alternating like this round AoE and the Scream of Pain, which will interrupt you and deal on a 20 about half the group's HP and damage. It's pretty easily healed off with just Atonement healing before the next one happens. Nobody should really ever be getting hit by Whirling Blades. See there, I start to cast my Radiance too early for the Scream of Pain and get Holy Locked. Really not a big deal. No one takes any more damage after that. And we move into the 2 pull down here. I think we do separate from the Enforcer, yeah. So we want that book. It's 10% damage reduction. Very nice for the last boss. Very nice for the second boss as well. I'm very happy when I see that that bonus in Court of Stars. Like that one and the haste one are probably my 2 favorites. They're pretty uneventful pulls. This is what Court of Stars looks like when you pull it cleanly. And, you know, nothing's running up on you and surprising you. If you know where things spawn, if you know where things patrol, you can pull what you want. And that's how you succeed at this dungeon, I think, is by playing it safe. The timer's pretty forgiving. So Felwon Enforcers are... I think these mobs kind of own pugs, because people don't really understand where to tank them and where to LOS them. The corners of buildings are generally where I like to go, because they are guaranteed LOS, like the big corners around the bridges. You also want to be fighting them where no other enemies are going to be patrolling, and we've cleared this entire right side at this point, so nothing's going to come and surprise us. They're fairly easy to do on their own, they're fairly easy to do with other mobs, as long as they're being tanked in a correct position. Just line of sight the Fel detonation, and she hits the tank. It's a pretty easy mob. Here we wait on Mr. Eyeball Man to come over here, and we tank him deep in this corner, just in case a new Felbound Enforcer spawns. You never want to be tanking the mini-bosses where either you could be run into by patrols, or where a new Enforcer could spawn. Yes, you see on the minimap, the one that spawned right behind us. So if we were further back into this courtyard, we would have been contending with Baelgar the Watchful and a Felbound Enforcer, which probably wouldn't have been a wipe, but would have been kind of a pain. So here I am asking the melee to spread before I dispel them, because I think there is procs damage when you dispel his impending doom. So here I can mass dispel it and it doesn't kill anybody, it deals about half HP. But if both melee have that debuff and you mass dispel them and they're on top of each other, they will both die. I generally will go for the mass dispel on impending doom when I can, just because Disc's healing profile is such that healing 2 people for the same amount is generally easier than healing 1 person at a time. At least I think, unless you've got, I guess, 2 harsh discipline penances banked up or something like that. We move into the next Enforcer. Same old, same old. Everybody eats the detonation here, I think because they have cooldowns rolling. We've got the Thundering buff going. It's not that big of a deal. I've got, plenty of healing to heal through the Enforcer detonation. There we get stunned. Let me back my video up here a second and check. I think the only person I could have cleared with at that point was the tank or the demon hunter, who both went around the pillar the opposite way. So is it my fault? Maybe. I probably should have been running over to the tank. Is it the DPS fault, the tank fault? Who knows? We live. The thing was already dead. Not that big of a deal. Generally, you do want to be paying more attention to Thundering than I was there, though. This last mini-boss is very easy. I think he's the easiest of the 3. He deals the least damage. Basically, all of his damage, except for his tank melee hits, are avoidable damage, so I think he's by far the easiest. The only thing you really have to watch out for is the shockwave is bigger than it looks, and the crushing leap, you don't want to be in Narnia so that he doesn't leap super far away from your melee. Generally, I try to stay about 10 to 15, 20 yards away from him. I think I use a defensive penance there, which has always kind of felt bad to use penance to heal, but harsh discipline penances heal for so much that it's tough to not use them as your primary tool. Like a tank at 30% HP, it is a very, very powerful option to top the tank off. And I think that'll be less of a big deal next patch when Harsh Discipline procs more often. It'll be proccing from both Power Word Solace, which I think we will take 100% of the time, next patch and Mind Blast. So you'll be sitting on Harsh Discipline, the extra 7-volt penances, fairly often, and using one on a heal will not feel as bad. So Talixae is a fairly tough boss, I think, for Disc. Like, her damage on Tyrannical last week got a little overwhelming. You have to be fairly deliberate about when you cast Power Word Radiance, and you can't spam it, or you'll be out of charges for when you want full atonement coverage, and you'll end up having to use like Rapture or something to get full coverage on the party. Here I start to put Renews out. I don't know if that's the call, like, right? Is that the most efficient thing to do? I wanted to blanket atonement. I wanted to get a little extra healing out. Renew felt like the button to press there. Flash heal was maybe better. Either way, I managed to keep fairly consistent 5 target atonement throughout this fight, I think is the correct way to heal it. I Shadow Fiend fairly early. I Barrier fairly liberally on this fight. You want to use your cooldowns. There's no reason to save anything on Talixae. Here we had with the Withering Touch or whatever, Withering Soul go off. That's easy enough to just Mass Dispel. On a Tyrannical Key, it can be a little more dangerous because you don't necessarily have the GCD it takes to Mass Dispel there, but it's not that big of a deal if you're running the Mass Dispel talent, which you should be in Court. Here we move into our little Amogus Sussy Imposter minigame. Thankfully, our Prop Paladin is running the Legion Artifact Transmog, which still works awesome enough that you find a couple of clues, and you can see his shield lights up when he gets into that pack there, and it tells him when he's nearby, so you really only have to find 1 or 2 clues for him to narrow it down. Next up here, we've got the Suspicious Noble mini-boss, which isn't too hard. You generally want to put as big of a shield on the tank as you can for each Vampiric Claws, as the damage that he deals heals him, and I'm fairly sure that absorbing it reduces the amount that he'll heal. The bats are pretty easy. Disc has not the greatest tools for dealing with it. You basically have 1 fear available to you, and I try to hold on to it for when DPS blow all their stops and I have a bat on me and have nothing else. I generally will hold my fear on this unless I know I'm the only person with something available. Fairly easy. Shield the tank for Vampiric Claws. Radiance plus Atonement Healing for Shadow Bolt Volley is plenty sufficient on this affix set at this key level. So Melandrus is a boss that I think a lot of people have a hard time with, no matter what healer they're playing. It's a difficult fight. You have to do somewhere from 70 to 110, 20,000 healing in 4 seconds to heal through every Slicing Maelstrom. So you have to be pretty careful about how you space out your burst healing, how you manage your cooldowns. We have our Warlock baiting here. You generally do not want to be the person baiting as a Disc Priest because you are so reliant on casting to do your healing, and having to move around a lot every time, every couple seconds can get really tough. But I've done it. I did it last week on a 19. It was not fun, but it is doable. So here's our first Slicing Maelstrom. I generally will go for 2 Power Word Radiance. The first one hits, not too hard, but if the back-to-back Radiance is my go-to for Slicing Maelstrom, it is not quite enough healing on its own, but you can generally go and just based off who presses a health stone, who has a wall up, who is in Power Word Life range, you just kind of spot heal as needed. Here I kind of mismanaged my Radiance charges, I think. You can see on my weak R's, I'm kind of letting them both recharge. Our Demon Hunter eats a Piercing Gale there, which, you know, sometimes are hard to see. This one I throw a Barrier down. Barrier is a very strong cooldown against this. I think you can survive a Piercing Gale at this key level unfortified with no heals inside Barrier. But obviously you do want to heal. One thing I've noticed this run is that I'm very inefficient about using Divine Star. I think I might switch back to Halo just because I'm more... I press it more often and don't waste its cooldown. Here, the group's a little low. It can be hard to dig out of this between before the next Slicing Maelstrom. Like right here, everybody's a little low. I think I tell everybody in voice to be ready to use like a health pot or something. I get Bop from the Prop Paladin here, which is super nice. You don't have to worry about yourself at all. Let's see. What have I've got Rapture rolling. I think I Raptured that last one. Yeah, I had Rapture come up right before it, or during it, rather. Which, Rapture isn't really enough on its own, but it can be really good to give everybody that nice shield buffer prior to a Maelstrom. And spread a full duration Atonement on everybody is really nice. I think Rapture is a very strong cooldown for this fight. So that's it. That's Core Stars. Let me know in the comments, or if you are someone that I send this to on Discord, or whatever, let me know if you've got any questions, concerns, critique. I would be glad to hear criticism from anybody who's better or more experienced at Discipline Priest than I. I am still learning, and thanks for watching.